Why don't we start off with the question of the week that actually came in? We got several good ones, but the primary one was regarding employee compensation. Okay, employee compensation. I know all of you think about that all the time, or you should. But regarding employee compensation, the question was, how much is enough without being too much? What's your thoughts and strategies that go into how you compensate your employees?
Yeah, and this question came up in my peer group too, and we had a really good discussion on it. Turns out there was a super wide range,
Yeah.
all the way from 38,000 to 110 for essentially the same skill set. One was a little
Wow.
less skilled, one's a little more skilled, but even so, that range it's too big,
Yeah.
right? We should have it. It should be fairly narrow. I mean, we should have an understanding of how much people need to be paid in order to work in this industry. And the thoughts behind it, I find really interesting. So when we dove into this in my group, the the guy paying 38,000 knew he was paying too little. But what he justified it with is he said, well, when this person came in, he didn't have any experience,
Okay.
and I had to teach him up on everything,
Coach them up. Yep. Yep.
coach him up. He started part-time, moved to full-time, and here he was, but now he thinks he's making too little money. He wants to make more money. And he was a little balking at that. He was like, I spent 4 years training this guy up, kind of like maybe he owes me. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, but people will move on if you don't pay them enough.
Right.
But paying them too much, I don't know if that makes them stay. That's the question. Like, so the guy at the high end of the scale was like, well, I never want anybody to leave because I just hate hiring. Um, but that can also hurt your business if you're paying too much.
Right. Right. What's interesting is I just spoke on this, and it was related to recruiting. Okay. And then compensation plans are a key component of recruiting. And there was an IBM study that I shared the numbers with everybody. And what stuck out to me was you would think compensation is the number one reason why employees leave. It's
I'm
not.
gonna I'm gonna go with culture.
And it is your culture. Oh, culture is kind of an overlying umbrella over all of that. But it's, do they feel like they're making a difference in the workplace? Are they treated with respect from their direct supervisor? They fit in. Those are culture related things. So you're exactly
Mhm.
right. And when I first looked at the study, I thought for sure it was going to be compensation because a lot of people use that as an excuse.
If you really like working someplace, you're gonna stay because
Hmm.
the risk is you make a few more bucks at some place you hate,
Right.
right? Not, and most people would not take that trade-off.
Yeah, I love that old quote. Everybody always thinks the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. I said, no, no, the grass is greener where you water it, where you apply yourself and where you make the most of the opportunity. It's funny you
Yeah.
brought up the employee that was hired and coached up and trained up. I was guilty of that too. I ran internship programs with my tech companies, and we often hired interns and plugged them in and trained them up and brought them up the ranks really quickly, but those were normally paid a little bit less than people that came from the competition. And you said something interesting. Let's maybe go back to this because I don't think CompTIA or any of the channel related entities have ever put anything together, but I'd love to see some type of floating pay scale, a range of, level one tech should be paid this range. Level two tech should be paid this range because it's 38,000 to 110,000 for the same position. That's too big of a gap. And
Yeah, it really what it
very
takes
subjective.
is you have to reverse engineer the amount that you're charging your customer
Hmm.
by the amount of time that your tech is going to be working for that customer. Like how many of those customers can they work for? What percentage of their time is it? Right. So if they're, and we always had a goal of 80% productivity level,
Yeah.
meaning 80% of what we consider to be billable time, whether that was billable as part of the monthly recurring revenue or billable as part of the project work, 80%, that was our goal.
Yeah.
So if I know that number, right, everybody likes to talk about per seat, but really when you're consulting firms like we are, it does all roll back to the hourly charge, right? Because you're building your per seat price based on those costs. But sometimes there's a disconnect between making the decision of what you're going to pay an employee and what your true hourly rate is
Yeah.
for that employee. Reverse engineer that, kind of roll it in and say, okay, what can I actually afford to pay based
Right.
on what I'm charging my clients? And I think that's how you should make that decision, right? You
Yeah.
shouldn't really make it on, well, this person was an intern that I trained up and, you're still in the mindset of thinking of them about as an intern
Right.
as opposed to, somebody that's now doing the job and what's the job worth.
Right.
And of course, you know, and I guess for some people, having a super high pay is a way to reduce turnover. Um, but the culture is now to have lots of turnover, right? People see on their resumes now that if they've been in a job for more than 3 or 4 years, the next employer's going to question that.
Yeah.
Why did you stay there so long, right? And the thought is you're not going to move up in the world unless you move around, right? So people are expecting to move around. And so if they're ambitious, they're going to move around
Right.
regardless of what you're paying them.
Yeah.
Just going to happen. And my thought was always if I got 4 years, I was doing pretty good.
Yeah. No, that's those are some wise words. I love what you said. You kind of build it up from the ground up because the real answer is it depends on a lot of factors. Like what you
Hmm.
said, what your service offerings are, what your average billable rate is, what they do for the business, um, where you're located in the country. Um, there's more and more remote employees, but my rule of thumb was always I wanted to do 3x the billable rate, from compensation. So if somebody's making $50 an hour, I wanted to be charging and reward them when they get over $150 an hour for billable work. I always wanted to use that as a rule of thumb. So ideally, you just say 33% or lower. That would be your employee cost for engineers and technicians. You want it 33% or lower from what you're billing your clients. So
Hmm.
that's the real answer. And something we didn't talk about, I'm also a big fan on rewarding performance. So if you've got a ticket monster that's closing tickets left and right, or a big project engineer that's billing through the weekends, and there's just a billable animal, reward that. I liked having a salary plus a bonus plan based on utilization, and we would track not just utilization rate, but also revenue. How much revenue are they responsible for each month? So especially on projects, that's easier as opposed to managed service tickets. So great.
Yeah, I would definitely carefully measure that productivity, right?
Mhm.
Because once you put a bonus plan in place like that, if it's a per ticket, you will have somebody gaming that system of
Yeah,
closing those tickets as rapidly as they can.
right.
What I always wanted, I was never concerned about closing the tickets as fast as they could. What I really wanted to know was that that item doesn't reoccur, right? It was
Right.
actually
A
solved.
redo. Yeah,
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 it was actually solved. And, um, that the messaging that we had to put out there was getting out, right? So we had, security messages, productivity messages, things like that, that the text needed to be um, showing their clients how to do something, introducing them to a new tool, educating them on security, doing these things to that was a customer service item that we wanted them to do, and that ended up generating additional, billable billable time, billable content, billable projects for us.
Okay.
And so that was all, in my company, that's all part of the job is the tech was not just there to close tickets, but they're there to also participate in education and revenue generation for the company.